Bible, we don't have a hierarchy of gods. We have one God.
All right, let's see it.
We don't have a myth in which, the gods order themselves. You've got one God who's in charge. All the other gods or servants or slaves to him.
You see this from beginning to end in the Bible. You have the Hebrew Bible adopting the title Elyon, Most High, from the Northwest Semitic pantheon as a reference to the deity who has sovereignty over the other gods. You see in Deuteronomy 32:8, Elyon, Most High, dividing up the nations according to the number of the B'nai Elohim, the children of God. The divine hierarchy is conceptualized according to two different frameworks depending on the time period and who's doing the conceptualizing. You have the Syro-Palestinian bureaucracy framework, and you can see a description of that in Lowell Handy's book, Among the Host of Heaven. And then you have the patriarchal household framework, and you can see that described in Mark Smith's book, The Origins of Biblical Monotheism. You have Psalm 82, where God takes his place in the divine council. God judges among the gods, and then God deposes the other gods of the divine council, the other patron deities of the nations, condemns them to mortality, and then the psalmist calls on Elohim to rise up, Kuma Elohim, for you will inherit all nations. You have in Psalm 97:7, in the original version of Deuteronomy 32:43, which is preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls fragment 4Q Deuteronomy Q, worship him all you gods, a call for the other gods to worship their sovereign deity. You have, even in the New Testament, references to this idea that there are powers and principalities throughout the universe that are unseen and that God has sovereignty over them. The notion that there's only one God, there's not a hierarchy of gods in the Bible, is profoundly misinformed.
And then that replicates itself in the human realm, right? You see in other mythologies, you have the hierarchy of the gods, and then that hierarchy replicates itself among the humans, right? And so it's natural, in a sense, to think of, if there's a hierarchy of gods, and there's one lead god, or several, and then there are slave gods, if you like, the same thing would be true on human cultures.
It's actually exactly the opposite. Human social relationships and frameworks and hierarchies are projected onto the divine world, and I discuss that in some detail in my book, Adonai's Divine Images, a cognitive approach, which uses the research from the cognitive science of religion to show how deity is conceptualized in the Bible and even today.
The Bible, different picture altogether. No, there's one God. The humans are not his slaves. He never treats them as slaves.
Again, from beginning to end in the Bible, God's followers are repeatedly referred to as Abdim and as Thuli, which are Hebrew and Greek words for slaves. Paul repeatedly emphasizes the notion that the followers of Jesus are slaves of Christ. You also have repeated commands that God's followers obey God's commands. You have the representation of the relationship of Israel to God as that of sovereign and vassal, borrowed from Neo-Assyrian vassal treaties. According to the Bible, God's followers are ideally slaves to God.
He treats them as partners who are called in to cooperate with him.
The notion that God treats God's followers as partners is not in the Bible.
And in some sense, called into his divine life with them.
You do have within Greco-Roman period Judaism, and then within the more philosophically minded streams of tradition within the New Testament and early Christianity, a notion of theosis or divinization, but that is largely muted within the main streams of tradition within later Christianity.
Very different picture. And I just wonder, back to the idea of why is the biblical tradition, why does it tend to produce equality, self-government, liberty?
The biblical tradition does not emphasize these ideals, and the biblical tradition has never been the proximate cause of their salience within society. Those minority streams of tradition within early Christianity that asserted the equality of all humanity were primarily because of the influence of Greek philosophy. When you get the rise of Renaissance humanism, when you get the Reformation's deconstruction of ecclesiastical authority, and when you get Enlightenment rationalism and concern for natural rights, you get the modern concepts of equality, of self-governance, and of liberty. The biblical tradition, the biblical text, is not the proximate cause of these things.
These other traditions don't. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's this fundamental difference in how they picture the universe.
No, this is a wildly uninformed and inaccurate representation of biblical approaches to divine hierarchies and to equality, self-governance, and liberty. This is an attempt to negotiate contemporary ideals back into the Bible so the authority of the Bible can be leveraged in the service of structuring power, values, and boundaries in favor of Christian nationalism, right-wing authoritarianism, social dominance orientation, and militant masculinity. And this is certainly the MO of Jordan Peterson, and it also seems to be the MO of whoever this person is.
As I said many times before, the God of the Bible exists in a henotheistic mindset because man has a henotheistic mindset in the belief that all gods do exist. Yet they do believe that there is a hierarchy in the existence of this God. Dan didn't mention it, but even in the beginning of your book, it talks about how the godly council decided to do creation and let us create man in our own image. Now we know that this is borrowed from the Sumerian story of Enki, Enlil, Ninhursag, and Anu creating man, just as the Egyptians had their group of gods who created man, and every other religion had their groups of gods who created man as a unified thing that was done through some sort of heavenly council with a supreme God sitting on top. This henotheistic belief never ceased in the Bible. It continued to proliferate itself because this hierarchy was man's way of projecting himself and his life, his culture, into this book on a continuous basis. Though many will say that Ezra changed and redacted and edited the Bible, the Old Testament, to say that there was one God who was never created, never born, got rid of his wife Asherah, got rid of any children that this guy may have had. We know that in Genesis, your Bible says that the B'nai Elohim were the ones who came down and started having relationships with the daughters of men. Never the sons of men, because all gods are men. All the angels are men according to this Bible. But these angelic beings were looked upon as the sons of God and weren't looked upon as man, because some are going to say that that was Seth's generations getting with Cain's generations. But that's just conjecture. That's just what people want to believe in order to make it fit their narrative. But every time Abraham or Balaam or anybody else encountered one of these B'nai Elohim, the angels, they always refer to them as Lord, giving them a prestige higher than themselves, but below the primary God to which they believed in. So they still establish a hierarchy even in that instance. And for him to say that we are not slaves to this God, that is also a misrepresentation, because today's morality says that slavery is not a good thing. So therefore, any ideas of that from those who wrote the book, they have to change it to make sure that it demonstrates the same. Your Jesus said that we are all slaves, and that slaves should be good to their masters, just as you are to be towards Christ, because you are considered a slave. This pulls from the Sumerian Akkadian teachings of men being made to be slaves for the gods and to care for the gods. This slavery mentality is in all the things of Exodus, Leviticus, and where they are commanded as to how they're supposed to take care of this God and how they're supposed to follow all these guys' rules. And that is slavery. That is not sons and daughters, because sons and daughters grow up to be adults and then are allowed to go and live their own lives however they choose, and are not given punishments if they don't choose to live it. That's an ultimatum, which would indicate slavery if there is an ultimatum, possession, control, if there is an ultimatum, which at the end of the day is slavery. And one other hierarchy that fits into your Bible is the idea of Jesus himself is a hierarchy. He cries out, God, take this away from me. Why have you forsaken me? Showing the separation between him and this Father. Now you're going to say it's a Trinity. But if it's a Trinity, God can never not know that he is God. So Jesus would have always known that he is God. So he would not have created the separation between him and his Father, because the Father and Son are totally different. So therefore, there is still the hierarchy. When he was 12, he was going about his Father's work, indicating a hierarchy. And if he was God, then he would have always known he was God, and he would have been doing his work, not his Father's work. But Christians will continue to change the Bible narrative to fit however they choose to fit it. In 3,000 years, it'll be totally different. but it won't survive. But y'all have a great day. Remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable.